This is Cannaramic, and we're bringing you cannabis like you've never seen it before.
I am so excited this afternoon to talk to someone that I have really grown to appreciate. You are doing such wonderful work. This is Jessica Gonzalez of the new law firm, Moyeno Gonzalez and Associates. And you just kind of started on this journey with your own firm. You've been an attorney in the space for a while. I'm excited to know kind of how you decided to go out on your own. What was the impetus behind that move? So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So Moyeno Gonzalez and Associates is a Latina-owned law firm with a special focus on cannabis. So we are the first all-female, all-minority small law firm specializing in cannabis in New York and New Jersey. So I was actually a part of the cannabis group at a law firm that I worked at previously. But what I started to notice was that a lot of folks, especially women and people of color, were having a hard time obtaining legal services from a larger firm, just because of the high retainer amounts, the high billable rate. And truthfully, I just could not live with myself if I had to stand on the sidelines and watch women and people of color not be able to have access to quality legal services. And in the cannabis space, if you don't have access to quality legal services, you're not going to stand a chance in this industry. And that to me really motivated me to be like, you know, if I can provide this service, why not just do it on my own so that I can tailor my rates so that I can lower the barriers of entry for these particular groups. Luckily, I found my partner through networking, cannabis networking events. CannaGather was one of them. And she had been on her own for a while, and she had worked on a previous application. She worked on 2 applications in the last round for the medical alternative treatment centers, representing a woman of color and a man of color. So I realized that both of our values aligned. And she had the corporate insurance, real estate, environmental background, and she's been practicing for almost 20 years. I had the intellectual property background, and both of that kind of synergy just really worked. And so we started our own law firm.
Now, you are the dream of your ancestors. I mean, you are first generation, right? Your parents were not born here, or your parents were not born here. You are first generation Ecuadorian. Well, you're Ecuadorian American, and you worked hard. You did everything that you were taught to do. Go work hard, go study hard, get a great job, which you did, and you decided to leave all that behind in order to go out in a risky venture, in a risky business, in a risky industry on your own. What were your parents, your family's response to this?
Sure. So I actually was not born here either. So I'm an immigrant. I came over when I was 3 years old with just my mom, my dad, and my younger sister. We have family already here. But I am the first to graduate from a private university, the first to go to law school, and the first to be a lawyer. So when I decided that I wanted to get in cannabis, which was about a little bit more than a year ago, I realized that it really entangled it. I could use my legal skills, I could use the advocacy skills that I've learned, and I could also touch upon 2 things that were very personal to me, both the medicinal side of cannabis and the advocacy side when it came to advocating for people of color that have been just ravaged by the fake war on drugs. And so I started really when I told my mom what I was doing. I did not particularly get a positive response, right? She'd worked really, really hard. She sacrificed so much so that I could go to school. And then to really tell her, well, I'm going off on my own, pre-legalization was, it was not very pleasant for her in the beginning. But once she started to see what I was involved with, once she started to see the advocacy part of it, once I began to educate her, she became very receptive to learning about it. I started really taking the route of talking to her about the medicinal uses, and then talking to her about how this war on drugs really impacted communities of color, and how, as a woman of color myself and as an attorney, I have a responsibility to really be a voice for those who may not be able to.
Right. Now, you mentioned that every once in a while she still will ask you, so you're not going to get arrested, right? What's that question that she asks you every once in a blue moon?
Yes, correct. So she, she wants to make sure, obviously, given that it is, still federally legal and it's not, adult use is not legal here in New Jersey. She does have a concern that, she always asks me, are you going to go to jail? And no, I'm not going to jail. I tell her that there are ethics rules that do protect attorneys from assisting cannabis companies right now. So that's really, for me, I told her this is a route that not many people have the privilege of taking in the Latino community. And because I do, and because of the experience and the education that I have, I feel, why not me?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think it's normal for all parents to, be concerned about their children and want them to take the straight and narrow path and to get that corporate job and not to do risky behavior. So what is it that's so unique about the Latino community in regards to their relationship with cannabis that makes this a little bit different than maybe, someone in the, Caucasian community whose child goes into cannabis space?
Sure. So the Latino community, they do have different concerns than, let's say, the Caucasian community or the African American community. The difference, being is that for the most of us, this is not really considered our home. Same thing for our parents or for our grandparents. So there are strong cultural ties to our home country. And in addition, you have language barriers. So there are, I saw family members who have been living here for, 20, 30 years, but who still don't have a full grasp of the language. So when you are trying to educate or encourage them to advocate, you have to be willing to speak their language. And I'm not just talking about Spanish, but being able to speak to their experience with cannabis in their home country. They may not know about what happened with Nixon and Harry Aslinger back in the 1930s, but they do know what happened in Colombia, and they do know what happened in Mexico, and they do know about those cartels that really ravaged South America. So in order for us to educate them and really encourage them to get out there and to advocate for social justice and equality in this space, we need to be sensitive to the fact that that conversation has to be very different and tailored to their culture and their values, which they brought over. They haven't gone away. It's still very, very strong, and we need to talk about it.
So obviously the trepidation that Latino communities have about cannabis are clearly warranted. I mean, you mentioned, the cartels that ravage these countries, and, we're talking about, death and war and just uncertainty and poverty as a result of that. So they're coming from that experience. What are those specific cultural ideals, that are very specific to the Latino community that are maybe creating barriers about cannabis? Like, you mentioned like how the family is the center of everything for Latino communities. Typically we speak directly to people about cannabis, but I'll speak to you about cannabis and tell you. But in the Latino community, it's really about, there's certain ideals. You got to speak to those ideals, and you got to really speak to the family. And the family is not just you, but everyone else, right?
Correct. And I always tell people when they're like, want to encourage others to join the industry or want to be a part of it, I always tell them it starts off with your immediate community. And most by that, I mean your family. And if your family has this, this idea of cannabis because of the stigma that is just so ingrained in them for decades, then that's really what you need to speak to them about. And if you want to be part of this industry, you have a responsibility to educate them about that. And it does take a lot of, Latino people are strong. We are stubborn. We came to, especially for, my family, a lot of times they come here by themselves, right? So they are so tight. They're so tight with their family because for a long time they didn't have anybody else. It's a survivorship mentality. Mm-hmm. And so now if you're telling me, well, I want to encourage my family to go out, well, then educate them in different ways. And like I said, one of the ways that I did was I said, well, it's medicinal. And then I just showed my mom really the medicinal benefits firsthand by, having her try it.
Mm-hmm. And you also talked about being raised with a mindset that it's just about, keep your head down and work hard, and this kind of idea that, we don't make waves, and we're not the, whereas African Americans, social justice and advocacy is like very much a part of our culture here in this country. I mean, the civil rights movement is like everything, right? So we're used to fighting the power all the time, right? But that's a different type of perspective in the Latino community, correct?
Absolutely. And even, in my field, only, I think it's about 1.4% of attorneys in the United States are Latina female. So I am part of that 1.4%, and so is my partner. And the reason for that is that these fields that are, very much dominated by men. And so then you kind of have to enter that, right? And not only enter it, but you have to be willing to speak up. But for a long time, our families, the way that we grow up, when you come from an immigrant family, it's keep your head down and be grateful for, what this country has provided you. And then you bring in the immigration aspect of it, right? And so in 2017, 77% of cannabis arrests were of the Latino population, right? And that's not really a coincidence because what else is federal? Immigration as well. So it's a different kind of narrative when you're talking to the Latino population and you tell them, well, you should go advocate and you should really go out there and, fight for our people. But what they're looking at is, I am going to put a target on my back if I start advocating for something that is still federally illegal. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the same way as, the Caucasian African American community, where you're correct, ever since it's, social equity, and they have been really, fighting this fight. But think about it's in South, for your, people who come from South America or from any Latin American descent, immigration issues, especially if part of your family, they're not, they have not acquired citizenship status just yet. That's a really risky move. You're asking somebody to put a lot on the line, and it took a lot to come here for them. It took a lot for my family to come here. A lot of, and you come here really with the risk of, okay, I don't know the language. I don't know the people there. I don't know the customs there. So once you're here and once you're kind of, you're all set, you're not supposed to make waves. You're just supposed to fly under the radar. And I've taken, the opposite approach of now being very vocal and being a voice for the Latino community. But I also have to acknowledge that it is a privilege to advocate, because I thankfully acquired citizenship status when I was a child, when I first came to the US. So I don't have those concerns that other people might. And it's really time to start bringing up those concerns and making them visible to the public that, listen, some people may not feel comfortable because there are other factors at play.
Right. You mentioned that 77% of federal arrests are marijuana arrests are with Latinos, and these type of statistics, along with other critical statistics in terms of health and the economies in our communities, the economic well-being of our communities, doesn't that create a level of urgency that, in spite of the fact that we have these barriers and these concerns and this trepidation about getting involved, isn't there like an urgent need to get involved in the cannabis space?
100%. There is definitely a need, and something that I have noticed now being in the industry for over a year is that there hasn't really been a group that specifically targets the Latino community. There are other groups that target different ethnicities, but for some reason, the Latino community we haven't come together and organized very well. But that also comes from the fact that, Latino people are also divisive because it depends on where you come from. You come from Mexico? Do you come from South America? Do you come from Puerto Rico, from the Dominican Republic? Even though we're all categorized under, you know, Latino, there's still a lot of cultural differences in there that we have to overcome. But I feel that coming together for this cause is absolutely worth it because we need a collective voice, and cannabis needs a Latino face there. And while there is, you know, a presence on the West Coast, about like 5.4% of cannabis companies are Latino owned, like 80% are owned by whites. And so that number is still very, very low. It is a little bit higher than other ethnicities, but it's not high enough by any means. And so there is an urgent need to get together, to get organized, and to start uplifting one another. But I think what needs to happen is people need to know that we're there, correct? And just yesterday, I had a Latino roundtable that I organized with another Latina woman from New York. We had about 20 people there, all Latinos, all in the cannabis space. And what we did was a discussion of how we're going to move forward, how we're going to work with one another, how we're going to empower one another. And we talked about it both from the advocacy side and from the business end of things, because essentially, if you want to get into cannabis, you want to get into the cannabis business, correct?
Right.
And so what we need to do now is work with one another. Because if we are not taking advantage of this economic opportunity and not helping each other out fiscally, we're going to be left out, as we've already been left out for quite some time.
Right, and also talk about the medical benefit, the medicinal benefits of cannabis. Let's talk a little bit about some of the chronic illnesses that we're seeing in the Latino community that, you know, really could benefit from participating in medicinal marijuana. You know, we've got, you know, of course, diabetes, which, you know, is certainly a problem in the African American as well as the Latino community. You know, cancer's rampant all over the place. You know, these are the type of illnesses that medicinal marijuana can benefit from: inflammation, arthritis, PTSD. You know, are those types of things, you know, being addressed at all in terms of why, you know, we need to participate in this so that we can achieve relief in our health, not only in our finances?
Sure. So one thing also that I have noticed, and from all of my friends also in the Latino communities, a lot of times Latino people don't want to admit that an illness is even existed. You know, for a long time, my mom, any sort of illness I had, it was take 2 Advils and a cup of coffee, you're fine. Just move forward. And so just now start to introduce them to really plant-based medicine. It's kind of almost going backwards for them, because our history is also with the Native Americans from South America. So you had, the Mayans, you had the Incans, from Peru. There are still many indigenous people in South American countries, and they rely on plant-based medicine. But for the Latino community, it may be going backwards as opposed to moving forward, because they come here and they see, oh my God, like there's Advil and there's Tylenol and it's not, $30. And so for them, it's something that's how the word is, like, it's like almost something special, right? Because over there, it's still very, very expensive. So then when you say, well, here's a plant-based alternative, they think that that's moving in a different direction. And so that's why the education is so important. And there are a lot of groups out there, really educating folks on this. The Cannabis Cultural Association is doing a very good job of it as well. Can Inclusive especially, Can Gathers as well. All of these groups are providing education, but that education doesn't matter if we don't even bring them to the table. And so one thing that I propose is that when we put on a Latino event, we want everybody who's a part of it to invite their mothers and their uncles and their fathers and their grandmothers, in order for them to see a professional community, so that it's not just this, hippie sort of, we just want to get stoned and have fun, but to show them that it's a legitimate business opportunity, but it's also it has so many health benefits that have been disguised for so long.
Right. So you're saying that the community, we emerge from this place of using plant-based medicine as our heritage, and then we look at Western medicine, and it's glossy, and it's packaged, and it's a Western, and everything Western is better. So going back, that's kind of why would we want to go there when we should be aspiring towards the American or the Western way of thinking, and that you feel is a barrier as well for people to participate medicinally.
Correct.
Ugh, okay. So you're saying the keys, let's talk about the keys to changing the minds of, not people like you, but grandma, abuela, abuelo, the great grandma, aunties, and uncles, because you're saying it's not you, it's really the family that needs to co-sign, right? They need to be on board in order for everybody to move forward. So you talk about having these events where, the family's all engaged and the family's invited. I'd like to see what that looks like. That sounds very, very interesting, with the kids running around and grandma's there and we're talking about cannabis. That sounds really, really interesting. I'd love to actually be a part of that and see how that's like. What other keys are there for, really being able to change the minds of generations of Latinos?
Sure. So one thing, there could be as many events as we want. However, once again, we kind of need to go back to, we need to really speak their language. And so something that I notice at events is there aren't any translators there, and there's no Spanish translated materials. And if they are, they're online and they're outdated. And I can't give that to a lot of my family members that I'm trying to educate, because if it's outdated, then it really doesn't matter. And if it's in English, then they're not really going to grasp it fully. And so that's one thing that I'm going to aspire, working with groups, to really try to have events where we do have translators there. So if you speak English, you can hear it. And if you speak Spanish, we will have Spanish translators there for you. And there was an event in Harlem, the Harlem Preservation Society put it on, and they had translators there. And it was very cool to see, because there were probably about like 5 people who came and who just had their headsets on, and they were actually able to participate. And that to me was such a beautiful sight, because it's something so small, but it's really a bridge between cultures. And that's really something that I would like to continue to see and move forward with, especially given that it's about, I think 44% of immigrants in the United States identify as Latino or of Hispanic descent, right? By like 2050, Spanish is supposed to be the #1 spoken language. So it almost baffles me that there isn't more information out there that's going to be accessible in Spanish. And so that's one thing that we're trying to change.
So having media and in Spanish, and not only in the language like Google Translate, but speaking the language, like there's a way to speak, understanding where people are from. There's a way to speak. There's a way to say something. What about like really taking on those myths that we have in these communities where some of these straight that's wrong, grandma. No, that's not true. How do you tell grandma that no, you're wrong about that? That's just propaganda. That's not How do you because we don't talk to our elders in that way.
Right. Exactly. And even, speaking to my mom about it, who was a very, she was very strongly opposed to it for a very, very long time. So now having a daughter who, quit her job, started her own thing, going into cannabis, once again, but it really took me like 2 years of advocating at family events all the time, whenever there would be some misinformation about it. And I'm always correcting people and letting them know that this is just propaganda that has just been disseminated, and it's just been ingrained for decades and decades. But when you explain to them the reason why cannabis was illegal in the first place, it starts to really change their mind when you start telling them, well, did you know that it was predicated, based on racism and prejudice against communities of color? And they don't know about that, because once again, the U.S. history isn't their history. But now that we are here, we have to make them aware of it. Even if they haven't learned, we learned it, in school when we were younger. They learned a very different type of history. So we have to really go all the way back. And what we think other people, or other, ethnicities and race groups may know, the Latino population may not know. But it's, once again, it's just because you have to understand that their home country is not the US. It's still where they came from.
Right, right. So knowing where they come from and being able to address those concerns. Is there, the whole issue of legalization, can there really be restoration in terms of having this community engage with cannabis until legalization takes place? Because isn't there always going to be this kind of fear of, this is still illegal. We may get arrested. We may get deported. Can we really engage in these type of advocacy initiatives until the U.S. declares cannabis as decriminalizes cannabis? Because this community is going to still be in fear of, being deported or having issues with being arrested.
Right. And once again, that's something that a conversation really needs to be around. And it always goes back to just educating them. And if there are, fears, we have to tell them, well, if you are planning on getting into a cannabis business, if that's what you want to do, if that is your dream, but you are, afraid of, any repercussions, what we always recommend is, well, just make sure that you're following the state regulations to a T, right? Because this industry, everybody, I don't think this actually may be a race thing. It's just everybody who's involved in it is really putting themselves at risk because of, the federal illegality. But really, it's just, if you're in a state where medicinal and adult use is legal, follow those regulations. Get yourself a really good attorney so to make sure that you're not straddling any lines, but you're walking a very fine line between what's legal and what's illegal. But once again, I think it just takes encouragement for the Latino population specifically to even let them know what opportunities are available. Because to everybody, they might think, well, I have to do a growing, I have to do a dispensary. And what I always tell folks is, you use whatever skills you have to enter the industry, right? I was an attorney, I was practicing intellectual property. I still do, with a specific focus on cannabis, but I use the skills that I have and I transferred them over to a different industry. So if you're an accountant, if you're in, IT, if, you're a graphic designer, we need all of that. And I always encourage folks, that's how you get involved. That is how you get your foot in the door, is by using skills that you have acquired and experience that you have and applying it to the cannabis industry. So I think the fear aspect is, everybody, I think, has a little bit of underlying fear for what they're doing. Some just use it as motivators, and for others, it may inhibit them. But, like I said, once again, for me, it is a privilege to be a part of this momentum.
Well, I would think that, especially since you talk about the population is going to be majority Spanish speaking in just a few more years, we're going to need lots of folks from the Latino community participating in cannabis, because we're going to need to be able to have those conversations and service those communities. So it's definitely important. And then when we have people like you with your law firm, with low barriers to entry, because your fees are reasonable and people can afford to have an attorney and people can afford to get legal advice, then they have a better entree to be able to get in the business. So I appreciate you, and I know the community appreciates you and your partner for all that you guys are doing, making an opening for folks to join into this new, exciting new realm. And I just wish you guys all the best, and I'm looking forward to seeing the new outgrowth of initiatives for this community, because it's so important for all of us to really have a stake in this and to be a part of this. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely. And it's been really great to be able to educate my community, expanding from my family over into, Jersey City, where I grew up, in different parts of New Jersey. So to be able to branch off on my own and then be able to speak exactly to the community that I was looking to service, and then be able to service them, it's been a dream. And it's always those thank yous, and you're doing so much for the Latino population, thank you. And I've had people approach me at random restaurants when I've seen them around, And that to me just reassures me that I'm on the right path. And it just motivates me even further to continue being creative and to try to figure out really how to get everybody who wants to be involved in this industry the chance to.